I'm joined today by Mr. David Weil, who's the CEO of the ICTS group. EBnet, incidentally, is also part of that group, so David's my boss, so I've got to watch my P's and Q's here today. But David, good afternoon.
Hi, Chris. Hi, everybody. Nice to be on the show.
Thanks, Dave. We're going to be chatting about the unclaimed benefits, and this has been in the press a lot lately. Unclaimed benefits in pension funds, I think, is touching about 50 billion. And I think a lot of people, first of all, don't understand where it comes from, what lies behind that, and what are the sort of solutions, what's the future, what's going to happen in that space. If you can maybe just clue us in on where we're at, David, please.
Thanks, Chris. You've asked me a lot of questions, and there's a lot to talk about, to be perfectly honest. The number 50 billion is only pertaining to retirement funds in South Africa, and yes, it is a staggering amount of money that is out there. However, there was a lot more going back 10 years or more. So I think one does have to give the retirement fund industry some accolade in probably, tracing 30 plus billion over the last number of years, which is a fair sum of money over that period of time. So let's unpack all of this a little bit and say, how did all this money arise? And the money arises from a number of different areas. First of all, the most common is where a benefit is due to be paid to a member and they never take that benefit. That is the most common cause as to how an unclaimed benefit arises. Then, of course, we had a peculiar piece of legislation going back to 2001, more commonly known as surplus benefit legislation, which caused a fair amount of unclaimed benefits in the market, to say the least. And, of course, it meant going back to data as far back as 1980. And that is probably where a lot of this unclaimed benefit money arose. And then, of course, there was another instance back in the 2000s, early 2000s as well, and there was a bulking scandal, which caused many of the big life officers who were bulking assets to actually have very small payments being made to many different people, and that in itself has been a huge problem. Many of these people, unfortunately, will be never traced. So getting this down from 50 billion to zero is never going to happen. And it is, of course, also fraught with a multitude of different problems. The problems start for a tracing agent when, in actual fact, they receive the data. And the data, which is handed over to tracing agent, comes from the administrator of a pension or provident fund or retirement annuity fund. And what the tracing agent requires is a reasonable information about the subject matter. And the subject being, the person's name, their middle name, their surname, their date of birth or ID number. Now, and any other information that might assist in the tracing of the correct person. So there is a great deal of risk for a tracing agent if they are uncertain in terms of the person that they are tracing. Because if they do trace the wrong person, it poses an enormous amount of risk. Now, I'm sure that a number of the incorrect people over time have been traced, but there are a number of checks and balances in place as well, which I'll take you through once I focus more on some of the barriers. And perhaps one of the barriers, first and foremost, is, in fact, besides the poor data that is received by the tracing agent, where we get very often the date of birth being 1/1/1971. Now, if you get that, and no ID number, there's no hope in hell that you will ever find and trace that person. Now, there is an enormous amount of people where there is no date of birth or ID number for that person. And without at least an ID number, without a date of birth, you really can't do much with the data in terms of finding somebody. Trust is one of our second biggest issues that we have to deal with. In an environment fraught with fraud,
Sure.
excuse the language, but there is very little trust in a tracing agent phoning you and saying that we've got money that you have left behind in a retirement fund. People, having been scammed so many times these days, are very reticent to, in fact, send through the document and provide you the necessary details that is required when tracing an individual, let alone them actually taking your telephone call in the first place, because we are inundated with calls from an array of different service providers looking to flog their goods and services. So that is one of our major challenges, is trust. And despite the best efforts, we still cannot get the total trust. Whether you have the letters of authority from the fund or administrator for whom you're tracing, it doesn't really help you in many instances. We also have got a number of barriers in terms of things like identity theft, fraud, which also make life very difficult for tracing agents, because the liability for the tracing agents is actually very high. Despite the fact that you want to ensure that you do have to have liability insurance, one doesn't want to be caught in in one of these situations where you're dealing with a whole lot of ID theft and fraud. And it has happened, and it will happen in the future. As soon as a syndicate gets involved, they often infiltrate into a tracing agent's database one way or another, and so you have to be very, very cautious in terms of what you're doing and how you're dealing with people, and ensuring that you are in fact finding the right person. So that is something that one needs to take into consideration. When a person is traced, they are required to send you quite a few documents. Besides filling in a claim form, they're also required to provide you with proof of employment, tax numbers, bank account details, identity number, and if it's in a deceased estate, so where a beneficiary is being traced as opposed to a former member, then you would need a letter of authority, and this causes that you can imagine the documentation that is required. And then, of course, where women may be involved or minors, and there's been a change of their particulars, that is a further document that is required when dealing with a trace. Now, you can imagine in the large population of South Africa and the number of people who we are tracing, many of these people, first of all, have no idea, one, what their tax number is. Two, actually, they don't even know how to access their tax number. And a lot of people also have tax issues. And unless you can get a valid tax number, and if you don't have tax issues, you're not going to be able to get your claim. And what tracing agents are required to do is before they're actually paid, they're required to give a ready-to-pay trace. A ready-to-pay trace is one that you have traced the person, got all their documents, and all the administrator needs to do is pay the member. And it requires all of this information, and it's a lot of information to get provided with before a tracing agent gets paid. And certainly the fee is not commensurate. A lot of people believe that tracing agents get a cut of the amount of money that's being paid to the member or beneficiary. Totally untrue. It's a fixed rate regardless of what the amount is, and in actual fact we don't get paid unless we might have traced the person and they don't supply us the documents. Unless we have provided them the necessary documents, only then will we be paid by the fund. And that in itself means that a lot of work goes into finding somebody, we may not necessarily actually get the documents back from that person. And in actual fact, the stacks are getting worse. So we may well trace somebody, but in actual fact, we may not get back 60% of the people that we actually trace. So that is another issue. We're also having to deal with backlogs within administrators, poor capacity within administrators to make the payments and process claims. So what happens is people get angry once they hear they got money. So we get a lot of queries coming back to us, frustration from members who have not been paid by the various funds and the institutions. But it goes back to a couple of fundamental issues, really. One is the very poor understanding of processes by members and poor education of those members in understanding of their benefits.
Right.
They don't understand they have benefits. And that's where I think we need to do a lot more education within companies, is to educate people about their retirement benefits, so that you when people do leave, that they take their benefits with them, and you're not left with this unclaimed benefit situation. There is, however, I suppose, with our thinking caps on, looking into the future, there is, as you can see, there's a very onerous process that a tracing agent has to go through. And how does one actually improve on this? And yes, technology is a major part of where the industry is moving to, and moving away from the paper-based environment that we've lived in, moving to an electronic way of life, where in fact we're able to do facial recognition with former members, where that facial recognition will then be processed by Home Affairs. Hopefully one day, and this is a wish list, to have a tax number then associated to that Home Affairs verification. And then, of course, there is the bank verification, which can be done electronically as well. So all the member would be required to do is fill in a claim form online, and they would then have access to their funds a lot sooner than they would right now. It would be a much more seamless process. So yes, there is a lot afoot in terms of where we're going with this industry, and one of the biggest problems being is the fact that there is still a relative unsophistication in the marketplace today. But I think one of the good things is that a lot of people have cell phones and smartphones at that as well, and that is hopefully where the secret to our future success lies.
Fair enough. Yeah, I think it's a massive job, and I think it's a big complication to try and resolve, first of all, the historical stuff up to this day, and then going forward, using the kind of technology avenues that are at our disposal and coming to the fore as we speak. You mentioned face recognition as one. The other one that's also coming is the self-sovereign identity, where a person will have your, you will take control of your own data and start sharing that with the different entities out there. Whereas on the previous Web 2.0, your data has been everywhere, all over the show. So I think that will change a lot, and I think it'll make life a lot more accurate in terms of the sort of job you guys fulfill on the tracing side. It should make things easier, but how are we going to resolve the historical one? Yeah, your guess is as good as mine. David, thank you very much. It's been fascinating, and yes, I certainly look forward to chatting to you about this again. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chris.